All right, here we go. I want to welcome everybody to another edition of Public Leadership Institute's online training series. This particular session is going to be very exciting because we get to unveil a brand new publication that I think is not only desperately needed, but going to be a valued asset to supporting leaders in our communities, policy leaders across the country, issue advocates, and grassroots organizers as well to effectively push a progressive agenda. So let's just jump right into that. My name's Dave Woodward. We got a lot of returning folks. We got some new folks as well. I'll be your host this afternoon. I'm the National Network Director for Public Leadership Institute, in addition to being a local county official and a former state legislator. And I'll be fielding your questions and comments over the course of the presentation. Just a little bit by way of background, Public Leadership Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and leadership center focused on bringing public attention to a variety of important issues, really focused on the areas of equity and justice, and we work with public leaders, elected officials, and others to improve the economic and social conditions for all Americans. And you can learn a lot about the tools and projects and resources that we have to offer you at www.public leadership institute. There you can publicleadershipinstitute.org. In addition, you can see a number of publications that are available as well, and I'm very excited. We're going to be talking about this new one coming up here. Before we begin, we want to make certain, and especially when we're talking about unveiling a new product and a new tool to use, we want to make sure we can hear as much feedback and answer as many questions as possible. And so to that end, you can, on your control panel, there's a variety of ways. People are joining us from their smartphones and tablets and laptops and computers and other devices in a variety of locations. At any time in the course of the presentation, you can click on the hand icon to raise your hand, and if you have audio capability, we'll unmute you and you can ask your question to our presenters. I realize that people join in areas that it's not always convenient to talk, but we really want to hear from you and answer your questions, so type in questions in the question bar at any time. In addition, you've got my email, dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org. Don't hesitate to email me a question. It's a little hard during the course of the presentation, but if there are any questions about this or additional things moving forward, feel free to email me and I'll get those questions to the appropriate person. I also want to bring your attention to an attachment on your control panel. It's a handout that's going to really be kind of like maybe the central piece of the conversation today. So I just want to make sure you all have available, know that that's available to download directly from your control panel. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenter, who's no stranger to these sessions, Bernie Horn, Public Leadership Institute Senior Director for Policy and Communications. He's a long-standing communications trainer, author, former political consultant, policy leader. Bernie's done it all in the movement and helping support advancement of progressive political and policy change. So Bernie, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dave.
So let's jump right in. Today's topic is how to run a successful advocacy campaign. I'm going to hand control over to Bernie here.
Okay. And I'm going to start this from the beginning. Do you see that, Dave?
Yep, we see it great.
Take us
away.
Okay, I just want to remind you of what Dave just said. There's a PDF on your screen there that if you click on it, you can have the very first copy of our new book, Preparing to Win, which is a guide to successful advocacy. And the whole book is there. You just click it and you have the whole book, and you're the very first people to see it because it hasn't actually been printed yet. It's at the printer. Everything that we talk about is either on this website now or will be on the website within about a week. This book isn't quite on the website yet, but a lot of the things we're going to talk about already are. As Dave said, there's other resources on the website. The Progressive Agenda guides you to about 200 different progressive model bills for either state or localities. The Voicing Our Values, we have a brand new edition of this coming out in a week, the 3rd edition, which will be on our website in about a week. We have the Playbook for Abortion Rights, which is on our website in full. And then this is the brand new book, Preparing to Win, A Guide for Successful Advocacy. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, we're coming up upon an election that is tremendously important, tremendously important. So much is at stake. Redistricting, whether people can vote or not, you know, whether people in states will have access to health care, whether governments in the U.S. will do anything about climate change, whether we're going to sell off our public infrastructure like roads and bridges and so forth that the Trump administration is going to attempt to literally sell off. So the only way to do something about that is to move in the 2018 election, and that includes very much so at the state and local levels, where if we can get a majority in states or localities, we can block a lot of the awful things that are going to go on. So before I launch into this, let me just add, you know, why the heck am I talking about this? You know, I usually talk about policy, and I'm the policy director and everything. I'm a lot older than Dave. I passed my first bill as a lobbyist. I passed in 1977, and I was the campaign manager for an advocacy campaign in county council in 1979, and I was first a contract lobbyist in the Maryland General Assembly in a little 3-person firm in 1980, and was the director of all state and local battles for Handgun Control Link, which is now the Brady campaign, from 1988 to 94. We won 36 state battles where we affirmatively passed gun violence prevention bills, and another 36 in counties and towns. And I was part of a consulting firm called Strategic Campaign Initiatives, where we worked for hundreds and hundreds of candidates on the federal, state, and local levels, and many causes, including both winning the major elections that turned Maryland from basically an anti-choice state to a pro-choice state, and then we were the direct mail consultants for the statewide referendum that won what's called the Freedom of Choice Act, or legislation to codify in the Maryland Code Roe v. Wade. At any rate, so I've been doing this for a whole long time, and what we want to encourage people to do is to be proactive, even if you're in a conservative jurisdiction. Proactive, that is putting in your own legislation, even if it's not going to pass, is the best way to make a difference. Proactive policy is the way to educate lawmakers. In many cases, lawmakers, both liberal and conservative, don't know what's going on unless a bill comes in front of them about it, because they're so busy with all the legislation they have and all the constituent services that they're working on. They won't even know something's going on unless there's a bill in front of them, even if the bill is not going to pass. It's a way of informing them that a problem exists. Proactive is the way to generate news coverage. When the other side comes up with their anti-choice legislation or their anti-worker legislation or their anti-environment legislation, they're framing the issue. They're getting the news coverage because it's their bill, and they get to, they get all the shots, and all we get to do is to get into their press stories. If you introduce your own legislation, even if you're in a conservative jurisdiction, this is the opportunity to really make news. Proactive also frames the issue in the way that instead of talking about the other side's talking points, like the death tax for the inheritance tax or job creators for some giveaway to corporations, that we're talking about our side, our legislation, putting our best foot forward. Proactive legislation forces officials to take a position. An awful lot of the time, if there's not an actual policy in front of them, they just aren't going to comment. They're going to say, well, I'm not going to do anything until there's a bill. Well, give them a bill. Force people to take a position, even or especially if they're against you, because how can you call them out unless they formally oppose your good policy? Proactive policy does a better job than reactive in building your grassroots. You can give people a lot more to do when there is a proactive bill, and it can be in a city or county or town, and build in that particular jurisdiction. People want to volunteer. This picture here, there was about 750,000 people there that day on the Women's March, and it was far more impressive than this picture here. It was unbelievable. And all of those people wanted something to do, and it's our job as progressive advocates to give them something to do. And if we're having them just wait around for some bill in Congress and then we tell them, oh, now call your congressman, we're not doing our job. We need to create battles at the state and local levels to energize them and to make them active and proactive. And the last thing about proactive is that, this is the way to indirectly affect elections. Where you're in a jurisdiction where you just can't pass good policy, it's awfully hard to knock out people without showing that they oppose good things. How do you show to their constituents that they're on the wrong side unless you get out there, show what the right side is, and make them take a position? I mean, that's what we need to do, and that's why we wrote this book. So this is divided into 21 chapters. For a lot of the chapters, you're going to get it better by just reading the book, and we're giving it to you, and we encourage you to do that. I'm going to take a little more time on the things that I think you can gain something by an explanation. And we're going to stop 3 times. So if you have questions, alert Dave, and either you can ask the question or type it in, and he will ask the question. So we're going to stop after just the first 6 of these, I think. The first one is to have an achievable goal. This is an interesting thing. I think that progressives have ideals, and we want America to be a certain way, and we have our advocacy organizations that are built around those ideals, which is great, and we've got to do it. But an advocacy campaign is a little different than an advocacy group. An advocacy campaign is something that is designed to achieve something. It is a quite an effort, a coordinated effort between policymakers and advocates, and that it's not really politics unless you're aiming for a goal, and that goal is something that you can achieve. So while some group might be a juvenile justice group and their idea is to reform the juvenile justice system, if they were to have an advocacy campaign, it would have to be about something that you can pass, like keeping juveniles out of adult jails. That's the difference. And so an advocacy campaign does not have to achieve its goal by passing state legislation or federal legislation. You can have goals that are about passing something in your county or your city, or changing administrative rules, or getting an executive order, or there's even other bodies that have the power to change policy, the comptroller, the auditor, an independent commission. But you have to pick something that can be done and focus on it. I mean, that's politics. And it's not a question of education, which is, politics is not really about education. It's about persuasion, about getting people to do something. Now, some advocates would say, but I'm in such a red state that we can't pass anything that's meaningful. So how can we have an advocacy campaign? And I would say that, in that case, the goal is to raise the profile of your policy, of your issue, so much that it makes a real difference in the election of 2018. That is, you're trying to get people on the record, and you're trying to get people to see that this is an important issue, and that opponents will raise it up, or our side will raise it up, or they'll beat each other up during the election over your issue. But if you don't get that, then how are you ever going to get a better selection of legislators or council members? And that's totally doable. Even in a red state, it's totally doable to drive your issue into the election conversation. Even if you're just a 501c3, there's an awful lot of things that your group can do to drive an issue into the public debate, including into elections. The second thing is to write down your plan. Now, I once had the honor of being in a campaign with a political consultant named Matt Reese, and he was the consultant who won the West Virginia primary for John F. Kennedy. And he is quite a character and a tremendous consultant, and he used to say, if it isn't written down, it does not exist. And, by that, if you have a group of people all working together, if you don't write it down, there's going to be a misunderstanding about what you're doing and why. So you create a campaign plan. And in the book, you'll see the different chapters or sections of the plan that you should do. But basically, you're going to talk about the goals specifically. What's the background of this policy? That is, why is the policy needed? What's the root cause? What's the political background? So what are the social and economic and political factors that cause this problem to be and not to be solved? Who's going to do the research, and what is the research needed? Who's going to staff your campaign, and what is their responsibility? What is the campaign message, or at least preliminarily, what do you think it might be? What are the targeting decisions that you have to make, and what do you think, some of your policymakers, who's on your side and who isn't. What are the coalitions? What are the groups that you can pull together in a coalition? I mean, where do the groups stand? Who could you target? Who would be powerful? Who would make a difference? How would you do your paid and earned media? How would you do your fundraising? What kind of budget? What kind of timeline? And all these things are laid out in the book. But it, even if you don't write a long volume about it, you should write down what you have in mind for each of these areas and make sure that everybody who is helping to run this campaign is on the same page. Writing down is kind of essential to agreement. The third chapter is about how to manage your time and money. And I want to suggest that a lot of us in politics just sort of do things the way they've always been done. We take one campaign and we just apply those lessons to the next campaign. And we know, oh, well, Bill Smith is the person to be the chair of Bexar County. The fact is that every campaign is different. And I urge you to sit back just a little bit and to think about what campaign management really is so that you can make the best decisions and not just the same decisions that were made the last time. The manager or the entity that's managing a campaign, the whole point is to be efficient with your resources. So there's only two resources in a political or advocacy campaign, and that's time and money. You can increase the amount of time and money you have, time being person hours, but very often we waste what time and money we have. The way to maximize our time and money is by focusing on two things, and that is to maximize the quantity of our communication. This is all about communication. Obviously, politics is about persuasion. And the other is to maximize the quality of communication. And this is what your campaign management decisions should be about. As far as maximizing the quantity of communications, that means don't waste your money on stuff that we do all the time. Overhead, big headquarters, giveaways that serve little or no strategic purpose. If you're managing a political or policy advocacy campaign, you got to say no a lot because people want stuff that they had in prior campaigns, and you got to say no, it's not an efficient use of our resources. And believe me, I've done that many, 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 many times. It's no fun saying no, but that's the only way to be a manager. In addition, large meetings are never efficient. You don't want to have too many of them because the cost of a large meeting is you take everybody's time, and as far as money, anybody who's salaried, anybody who's on staff, the time, the salary that they're getting for that period of time, and you add it all together. Any large meeting is going to be a tremendous expenditure of time and money that should be spent on contacting people and urging them to get to their lawmakers. So you don't want to have too many large meetings, and if you have them, you want to really plan ahead, have an agenda, keep it to just a few key matters, don't let it get sidetracked, and get the participants back to work, actually persuading people. The other thing is, as I said, maximize the quality of communications. So that's about having a focused message, which often our side doesn't have, and often the other side does. If you don't have a focused message, then you're being inefficient with your resources, both money and time. So you have to create a campaign message, like 2-3 sentences explaining why you want something and what it's going to do, and then you want talking points that explain those few sentences, and your whole campaign is to repeat that message and those talking points over and over and over and over, because we think that we say something and people hear it, but no, they only hear it the 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th time you say it. That's why TV ads are repeated over and over because people don't hear it until the 7th time that they see or hear the ad. The 4th chapter is about researching your policies, and this is something that's better read than me explaining, but there's a whole series of things to research. It's much better to research ahead of time than to do it while your campaign is going on, because you don't want to be taken by surprise. You don't want to have go down a path for some legislation and find out that actually there's a pretty good argument that it's preempted or it's unconstitutional. Or you don't want to go down a path and find out that, you know, there was a debate only a few years ago that was very similar and it had a very unfortunate end. So that's a part of the book I just suggest you read. Poll your policies. So I've been doing this business of helping lawmakers with progressive legislation since the year 2000, so that's 17 years. It is astonishing how often people are having big fights, spending a good amount of money without a poll about their own bill. It is just so incredibly common. You should spend up to 10% of the money that you're going to spend on a campaign on public opinion research, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you're wasting all that time and money. So this slide here is just you know, one of the questions out of a poll that PLI commissioned about reproductive rights, and you know, here's 3 bills that are wildly popular. And you know, we have polling on a whole slew of our bills, and there's just lots and lots of campaigns of every kind that just don't have a poll. A poll, it's not, you don't take a poll to find out what you favor and what you oppose. You know, we use our values to figure out what we favor and oppose. The point of polling is to decide, you know, what to advocate in a particular situation. You know, what problems do people think exist, and what solutions do they think will work? You know, and what messaging works best and what doesn't work. And to determine if this were an election issue, would people actually switch sides based on your issue? It's interesting. Some things really hit voters in the gut, and they say, yeah, I would switch sides, and others are not that important to them. You want to know, both for your own use and also to show people that, you know, this is a real election issue. And you know, a poll is a great way to convince funders, groups, advocates, the media, that you've got a winning issue, that the public's on your side, that they should pay attention to this and they should join your side because this is the will of the people. Without a poll, how are you going to prove that? And the last slide, I think, before the questions, the first set of questions, we did a webinar with Vinnie DeMarco on May 17th, and you can find and watch the webinar we did with him on our website, publicleadershipinstitute.org/webinars, and go down to May 17th and you can watch the whole thing. But basically, there is this 6-step program that has worked repeatedly, and that was invented by Vinnie DeMarco. And it involves some of the things that I've already talked about, but there are 2 aspects that are unusual. One of them is a resolution strategy, which I'm going to get to in about 2 slides. And the other is that this strategy revolves around an election, so that you do a great deal of work in anticipation of an election, driving this issue into the election and forcing candidates and lawmakers running for re-election to take a position on your issue during the election, and you compel them to do so by saying that we're going to make, a big media splash with the list of who's on our side and who isn't, who pledged to support this policy and who didn't pledge to support this policy. And candidates and lawmakers are most vulnerable during elections. They have the greatest desire to commit to something during an election, even if they can't be forced to take a position during a legislative session. You can force them to take a position during an election because they don't want all that press to go out without their name on it. At any rate, I'll let you read this part or watch that webinar, but it is wildly effective, very, very effective, and I encourage you to copy the success of this program. So let's stop for questions so far.
And folks can ask questions by typing them in the question bar or raising your hand. We've got someone who did raise their hand, and so, or had raised their hand. Oh, yep. I take Jacqueline. Jacqueline, are you there?
What you do when you have a campaign you want to run.
Hey, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Great. Did you raise your hand to ask a question of Bernie?
I did.
Fantastic. Go right ahead.
My question is, what do you do when you don't have money for polling?
Well, if you don't have money for polling, there are a few options. I mean, without money, you can't have too much of an advocacy campaign. I would say that you want to build a coalition where the members of the coalition substitute for the poll. That is, you can convince people that it's popular and that it has political backing by the group of people and groups that are behind you. This is a little harder if you don't have a poll, but I think the broadest coalition you can have might be able to substitute at least for some of the political benefits of a poll.
Right. Well, and if I could jump in, Bernie, too, is that I think that some of these issues that we know are popular, issues around minimum wage, issues around paid sick time, issues around some of the abortion rights work that we're working on, and others in which there has been national polling, and we might, and I would consider, depending on what your topic is, I would reach out to maybe some of the national organizations or statewide organizations that might have done some research on this. That's one way. The other thing is that you don't necessarily have to spend the money on a $25,000 or a $50,000 poll. There are mechanisms available to buy into other polls if you're trying to test a very simple question and get an initial reaction in an area that might already be going out into the field. And so I'd encourage you to tap into your progressive infrastructure in your state and be happy to talk about what some of those things might be, in which you might be, for fairly low costs, be able to get some information. And then there are other polling tools that are available that you would be surprised wouldn't cost very much. I mean, Bernie and I, and some of these webinars we've talked before, 3 years ago, I took birthday money and did a Google survey poll across my state, testing the public support for raising the minimum wage. we weren't talking thousands of dollars, we were talking hundreds of dollars. And as a result of that, not only did we generate huge amount of earned media of people like demonstrating how popular it was, but became a catalyst that rallied attention and need to organize and lead a campaign that resulted in raising the statewide minimum wage in very unfavorable red state status conservative legislators and a Republican governor. So Jacqueline, to that, if there's another follow-up question, if there's a particular topic you want to talk about, that there are organizations doing a lot of this research that you might be able to get access to show that there's huge support. Use that as a call for action to say we need to raise some money to do a more comprehensive poll research, etc. If it's a brand new idea that no one's been testing, again, use it as, make a pitch to potential allies that would be interested in seeing the public support to get to the steps that Bernie talked about. I think it's really important because it's, when you talk about it in the context of getting public leaders to kind of buy in, one of the questions they're going to ask is like, how popular is this? And more importantly, they're going to ask, well, how popular is this in the area that I represent? And to have that information can be very useful in moving people from a undecided position to a yes, I'm with you position.
Dave, your answer is much better than mine, and that's because Dave has tremendous experience in advocacy campaigns, so thank you.
Hey, I was born the year you did your first, so no, it's I think that this is the framework that Bernie's laying out here is so absolutely crucial to organize your coalition, to get people focused on a particular solution, and think about this as a strategy of changing the conversation, changing the public narrative in which the upcoming 2018 election or elections even sooner than that are going to happen in. And if we want, what I love the way that Bernie's talking about this. We always get frustrated that candidates aren't talking about the issues that are important to us. Well, how do you do that? Well, we do it by putting the issue out in front, getting other people asking it, getting earned media around, and all those other types of things, and forcing candidates to talk about those things. And as a result of that, hopefully create a public narrative that gives some advantage to progressive individuals who are running for office. We've got a question here from Leonard asking the question, like, why is it that it seems that politicians are looking to polls as defining what they stand for and what they do? And so I'm gonna read a little bit more into that. Bernie, I think when we talk about research, when we talk about poll, that I think you started off right. Polling is not to decide and help us decide what we stand for. Our values do that. We poll to, kind of help inform strategy, help identify opportunity. And so I think Leonard is talking about this. This question. It seems like politicians are chasing the polls instead of driving the polls.
Yes, and we talk about that to some extent in our other book, Voicing Our Values. There really isn't such a thing as a moderate voter. There are people who are in our base, in the conservative base, and people who are persuadable in the middle. But they're not persuadable because they want more modest legislation. They're persuadable because they don't pay that much attention to politics, and they have in their minds both progressive and conservative ideas and ideals, and they can be persuaded either way based on those. I think that more progressive or more liberal office holders have believed in the moderate voter for many years, and they don't quite understand their isn't really such a thing. There's a persuadable voter, but not a moderate voter. So you might as well stand for your ideals.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer is asking the question, so we talk about the importance and the value of doing this in conservative, very red areas. But how do you keep momentum if the political reality is that the political leadership in those areas aren't likely to take up what you're proposing anytime soon? So, Bernie, I mean, this gets back again about like the importance of a proactive strategy. But I think this also, the question also gets at, like, how do you define the win? Because you obviously don't want to demoralize your base. You don't want to, and your supporters and your coalition. A little bit this gets at defining the win and linking it back to a long-term strategy, not just a 6-month, 6-week campaign.
Well, we're going to talk in 2 slides about the resolution strategy, which is a way to have a long-term effort, has many opportunities to get press, and occurs before you ever try to introduce a bill. But basically what you're trying to do with your advocacy campaign is to have as many opportunities as possible to get into the media and to get activists something to do and to give them opportunities to speak out, whether they're able to persuade policymakers or not. And why don't I leave it there, because I want to go more in depth in 2 slides.
That makes sense. I think we've handled the questions right now, so why don't we move on to the next session, and then if people have additional questions, raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel, or type questions in the question bar, and we'll try to get to as many of those in the next segment.
The next chapter is about framing your messages, and I won't go into this because we talked about this 2 weeks ago, and there's going to be this new edition of Voicing Our Values available in about a week. But basically, the bottom line is that in order to frame your message, you have to begin an agreement. You have to find some place where you're agreeing with the beliefs of your listeners, and that's not so hard. They almost always have the same ideals in their heads, the same goals, and you're trying to touch them there to show them that you have the same intentions. You may have a different way to accomplish it. The second rule is to stay in agreement with your listeners, and there's many ways to do that, but we recommend using values. And our book explains this in some detail, but there are words that describe political ideals like freedom, opportunity, and security, which automatically put you in agreement with your listener because they're in favor of those same ideals. And what you're trying to do is to show them that your policy, the progressive policy, accomplishes those political ideals that they already favor, but they didn't know that the progressive policy did it. You're trying to reel them in by showing that you're still in agreement with them. And then the third rule is to show listeners how they benefit, their family, their friends, their community, rather than talking about what's in the common good or what's best for society. The people who are persuadable just don't think that way. Sure, people who are in our base are interested in what's best for the country or what's best for our town or its society or people in poverty, but the people we're trying to persuade are very individualistic, and they want to know what's in it for them. And the fact of the matter is, every one of our policies benefits average people. They benefit the middle class. Even if they don't directly benefit these folks, they indirectly benefit. And the fact is that conservative policy, especially the radical right policy that's being discussed in Washington today, hurts them. They may think in their minds, you know, this is just an attack on the poor, but it's an attack on them, the persuadable people in the middle class who are unaware of how this legislation is going to directly or indirectly hurt them. And that's what you need to be talking to them about, not how it's going to hurt some third party, but how it's going to hurt your listeners personally. And I guarantee you it will. So I want to talk about this resolution strategy. This is part of what is in the DeMarco factor and invented by Vinnie DeMarco, but it's a very simple concept, and it is to create a resolution, a one-page resolution just like this one, about your policy, and you get groups to sign on. Not individuals so much. I mean, you know, somebody who's really rich or well-known or CEO of a big company, sure, you could get them to sign. But the main purpose of this is to get organizations to sign on to this idea, this policy idea. It's not a bill. It is an idea. And since it's not a bill, this is entirely 501c3 work. You can spend years getting people to sign these resolutions and never go afoul of your tax status. And you can build a tremendous coalition by getting people to agree to this resolution. Now, since you're going after groups, it's more of a formal process. You know, some groups you're going to have to go in there and convince them, and they have a vote. In some groups, you know, there is some kind of structure of leadership who decides whether they sign or not. But it's a process that anybody can do, and as you do it, it's the opportunity to persuade each of these coalition partners that this is a good idea, that it's to their benefit, that they would enjoy being part of the effort. And you know, what you're trying to do is to start your legislative battle, you know, your introduction of a bill, with a coalition that's already signed on to the concept of the bill. Hundreds of groups who have already signed up for the concept, and the bill's just describing or putting into effect that policy that everyone agrees to. Groups that would never endorse a bill will endorse this resolution, and this has been proven many times. I did it myself I was the head of an effort to keep casino gambling out of Maryland. I was the campaign manager for 3 years. We beat the casinos 3 years in a row. You know, they outspent us 100 to 1. But it was this way, by getting groups into a coalition through a resolution, and it's very powerful. It's worked over and over for others. And anybody can do it. This is described more in the book. And then Chapter 9 is about building and using your coalition. So these are the groups, or some of the groups actually, that just signed on for the 2017 legislation in Maryland. They all signed the resolution, and then these came on for the legislation. And you can see that it's not the usual suspects. You know, there are on here groups that promote equality. There are groups that have a particular policy area. There's labor groups. There's faith groups. There's professionals. There's business groups. So that it's not just the folks that you would expect to be in coalition. The whole idea is to broaden who's on this coalition for this bill. Too often, our groups have a small group of friends, and they sign on to each other's bills, but they're the usual suspects, and it doesn't have a whole lot of effect on the legislators or council members, because they don't see that as, being a broad coalition. They don't see the political power behind it. What you want to do is you want to get groups that would not agree with you on everything, groups that may not agree with you on most things. You want to get unexpected partners who agree with you on this particular policy or this particular bill. And you'd be surprised who you could get. So, when I was doing this campaign management around casinos, stopping the expansion of casinos, we had some press conferences with both Ralph Nader and Ralph Reed together. It was dynamite. It was like political dynamite and tremendous media to get such such opponents together behind the same policy. And that's what you're trying to do in a coalition, is to get people who are addressing the policy from different points of view. And you can do it. You can do it for your legislation. It's just that we don't do it enough. The 10th chapter is to build and use your volunteer base. Now, what we tend to do in progressive groups, and I've seen this many a time as political consultant, is that the group tends to decide ahead of time who their leaders are, and they may have a very nice volunteer operation, but they don't trust their volunteers very much. What you want to do is you want to give volunteers the opportunity to become leaders, because if you do that, you're going to be surprised or shocked by who eventually steps out as leaders, and the amount of work that these people do for free and are, such effective advocates. And I, have some people in my mind as I say this, people who, I thought, this person doesn't have the knowledge or training or background to be, a major leader on our issue, but we got that person there, and they were incredibly powerful. The way you do this is by creating what's called a ladder of engagement. A ladder of engagement is a collection of tasks that are grouped from the easiest with the least responsibility to the hardest with the greatest responsibility. And you start raw volunteers on the things that are basic volunteer tasks, like participating in a campaign event or participating in an activity at campaign headquarters, like this kind of phone bank shown. And the people who are good at this and have the seem to have the ability, you try to get them to take on tasks with modest responsibility, like recruiting other people to come, or doing research about policies or politics, or participating in some more complicated operation. And you see who can take that step and who can't. And then you have things that require moderate leadership responsibility, like leading or co-leading an event, or leading or co-leading an effort to get some particular group to sign the resolution. The resolution is a great way to find those volunteers who are going to do more than you thought, because you want any group you can possibly get to sign a resolution, so they can go to their gardening club. It's fine. It's valuable, no matter what the group is. And you'll find that once someone gets one group on the resolution, let's say they're an active member of some civic association, they get the civic association to sign on, and that's a real victory. They'll want to take on a tougher one, and they'll go for more and more and more resolutions signed by bigger and bigger groups. At any rate, you want to take the people who have shown they can do something and explain in great detail how to do the harder task, and see whether they can do that. And then ultimately, if they're really great, give them some training and treat them as if they're on your staff, and some of them for free are going to work harder and more effectively than some of the staff that you're paying. It just happens. It's happened many, many times. It always astonishes me, but it always happens. Then, the question is, so what are you, generally speaking, what do you want these people to do? Aside from the resolutions, if you're talking about a bill that's already been introduced, there's really 3 levels of what's effective or ineffective for contacting lawmakers and trying to get them on board. Very effective is like you get them at a town hall, or you get them in front of an audience that they really care about, and they commit right there in front of people who are listening. Or a personal meeting in their office, but there's someone there in the office that if they say that you're there for your bill, that's it. They can't switch. That would be very effective. Fairly effective communication is a call or letter or email from constituents or somebody that the lawmaker really cares about. And fairly ineffective is letters, emails, calls, petitions, social media posts, where the lawmaker can't tell that those are important people, that they're constituents, that they should pay attention to them. And there's an awful lot of activity in the progressive movement that really generates ineffective contacts. Those contacts might help you build your list, but they're not going to persuade lawmakers. So generally speaking, what you want to do with volunteers is they can't really help you too much with the most effective types of contact, and you don't want them helping you with the ineffective. You want them basically generating calls, emails, and letters from the constituents of the persuadable lawmakers or policymakers. Now, generally speaking, your volunteers don't live where there's persuadable lawmakers or policymakers are. So you've got to do some things to reach into that legislator's district, like set up a table in their district with your volunteers to get people to call or write, with like cell phones right there. Dial it for the person, hand it to them and say, here, say this. Or going to meetings of organizations or services at churches where they support you. Hopefully they signed the resolution, and you get the people there at that meeting or service to immediately call, email, or sign a letter, or walk door to door in that district, or to have what's called a patch through calls, where you can be anywhere, and you needs a little technology, but you're calling somebody in the district, convincing them to talk to their lawmaker, and then at the flick of a switch, they're connected with their lawmaker's phone number, and so they immediately deliver the message that they just promised to give. And that's effective too. That's the whole point, is we want to use our volunteers effectively, and there are many ways to do that, but so often we either don't really use them well, or we use them for ineffective communications. The 11th chapter is about building relationships with policymakers, and I'm gonna go a little faster with these chapters. Basically, you've got to spend time with policymakers before you ever ask them to vote for something, especially if you're on the staff of an organization that's trying to do policy. You got to spend time getting to know people, go to receptions and parties and picnics and events where you can just talk to the lawmakers one-on-one without ever asking them to do anything. Just say who you are and what your organization does, and thank them for doing something, and just get to know them. The same thing is true with the press. We tend to, I don't know, be scared of them. Before you ever have legislation in, your city council or whatever, you want to create relationships with the press. You want to talk to them like they're regular people. They are regular people. What you'd like to do, if you were like in an advocacy group, you want to create a one-page thing that tells what your group does and what it stands for, and go visit with each individual reporter and say, I don't have a bill for you right now. I'm not seeking any press. I just want you to know who we are. Here's a page. Here's my card. Tell me, what's your deadline? If we have something that's important, when do you need it by? Do you prefer to get stuff by telephone call or email or text? If we have a document for you, would you rather have it as an attachment to an email, or would you rather have it delivered to you personally? What's your beat? Or would you be the person that covers our issue? Is there somebody else at your newspaper? You want to have this relationship before you ever go up to them and say, hey, we've got this great thing that we'd like you to cover. And the last thing before another break to ask questions is tracking. So the other thing that progressive groups don't tend to do all that well, or don't do as well as they ought to, is that we spend an awful lot of time talking to people who are already on our side or who are hopelessly against us. You have to focus your resources at the people who are persuadable. So that means you need to create a list in the form of a database or spreadsheet for each of the lawmakers or policymakers or whoever you're aiming at, and you want to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 in politics, everything in politics is 1 to 5. 1 is they're totally on your side, and 5 is they're totally against you. And you want to find out where people stand, and then you're trying to move them toward 1. And generally speaking, you're aiming at the 2s and 3s. People who are 4s generally are actually against you, and they're too polite to say they are. And the people who are 1s, you want to keep in touch with them and keep thanking them, but they're not persuadable. They're already on your side. You're trying to focus on the people who persuasion will help you, will make the difference. And so if you're dealing with a body that has, hundreds of lawmakers or policymakers, you have to keep track and keep notes about each contact with each one of them so that you know where they stand, what's concerning them, what you need to address. So that's about 2/3 of it. Any questions about that?
We do have a couple questions that are coming through here. So I'll start off. Rod posed a question. And I think as I'm reading this correctly, speaking of like a millage tax levy, I mean, they're seeking to increase this November, and it's a conservative community where the word tax, the idea of tax, is not looked on favorably. Would some of these techniques and strategies that you're outlining here, Bernie, be helpful in that? As for a little more detail, and we're talking a tax to support the San Juan Water Conservancy District, money being used to fund projects, water storage facility, watershed management, incorporate water conservation and local land use policies, codes, etc. So I think this speaks a little more to kind of like a ballot question. Obviously, if it's on the ballot, I'm making the assumption, and Rod, correct me if I'm wrong, that the local, that whatever taxing authority voted to put it on the ballot, or if it was a council district or whatever, some political leaders put it on the ballot, and there's a direct connection of getting public leaders to take action. But can we talk, I mean, is there utility on using some of these techniques to kind of forward these questions that are calling for a public investment, a greater public investment in things, particularly in areas that may be less favorable of raising taxes in general?
Yeah, I think several of the things that we've talked about would fit that situation. I mean, obviously, the first one is the message framing. You know, the other book, Voicing Our Values, goes far more in depth about this, but in a case like that, you really want to find a message that makes people feel like they personally benefit. And I'll bet they do. I mean, I'll bet that there are very solid reasons, and the conservatives are just going to try to bank on the fact that people don't like taxes and just say tax, tax, tax. What you need to do, though, is have a simple, focused message. What we tend to do in a situation like that is to have like 5 or 7 or 10 different benefits that we're going to get from this tax, and it's all very factual. What would work is to figure out what's the ideal that we're really pushing, that what's the values. Very often in something like that, it's the quality of life in our community. So you're saying that, you know, we've got to protect the quality of life in our county, and and emphasize, you know, how important that is, and that's why we moved here, and that's why we stay here, and that's why we're so proud of it. And then after you've got them agreeing with you about that, say, you know, got to do this to get that. You know, without this, we're going to lose our quality of life. Get them agreeing, get them nodding. Instead of having, you know, 10 different facts, which people won't sink in, get an ideal to sink in. Get progressive values to sink in. That's one aspect. The other is about the coalition building. What you want to do is to create a really broad coalition behind something, and usually this kind of thing, I think that you can get very progressive organizations on the same side as some businesses and folks that are surprising to be on the progressive side, and you got to deliver that as, you know, everybody's on one side. It's these ideologues over here who are against taxes versus everybody who cares about the quality of life in our community.
Great.
Anyway.
Great. Got another question. Andrew actually asked 2 questions. One, do we have any other non-Maryland examples in which this model, that, I mean, that it works well? That's one. I think we may be talking about in the context of answering the next question, which I think is really important that Andrea is bringing up, that she finds that members of volunteers have more urgency when they're defending against bad legislation, bad proposals, etc., but feel discouraged when proactive legislation can't even get a committee hearing. How do you keep that enthusiasm up? And so, I mean, can you think of any examples of that? And I have a couple that come to mind actually myself.
Well, you know, what comes to mind immediately is the abortion is healthcare resolutions that we launched in various jurisdictions in 2017, and in some successfully, even though they weren't going to pass and change policy. They were very successful in activating the base, creating press opportunities, getting the opportunity to tell our side, and we did win some of these. The Colorado House resolution, 2 resolutions in Texas counties. I don't think, honestly, that volunteers are more motivated by the defensive. I think that they're more aware of the defensive because we're not giving them the opportunity to go on offense. Sure, they go out for the Women's March, but there's very little to do to follow up unless you create something for them to do. So I think that by going proactive, you give people far more opportunities to do things on your side than the reactive, which of course you have to do also.
Right. Well, and I'd add to it is that I think so much, in the progressive area, especially in this current environment where conservatives control the overwhelming majority of legislatures and governor offices and the dynamics of Congress and everything, that we're literally on defense mode all the time. And it consumes a lot of energy. And frankly, the political reality is that we don't have a lot of political power to stop some of the decisions that are being made. Related to something that Bernie mentioned, speak to Michigan, that there is part of an abortion rights project we're working on that for the first time ever, 10 proactive abortion right bills get introduced. Abortion right activists, organizers, advocacy groups, etc., coming together, working together, who are always on defense and have been in defense in a variety of ways for more than a decade in Michigan, which until this last cycle was seen as a more bluer state, but not at the state level. And what we've seen in short order, and these bills literally just got dropped a couple weeks ago, generating press support. These individual groups are getting excited because they see that they know that these bills are likely not to pass this current legislative session. They did the research. They developed the policy and the proposal, put an agenda together, have mapped out a plan to organize and continue to earn media support over the summer, with the eye on changing the political environment to put some political leaders in office today in defense nonstop from now until 2018, with the hope of creating the conditions that some of these seats might get flipped. And so this comes back a little bit we were talking about before, is defining the win. No one's under delusion. A hearing's going to get made, but can we galvanize and put a member of the legislature, a member of Congress, etc., on defense, and literally stay on them over and over and over again, to either say, I come to the conclusion, we don't want to touch these things, I do not want to upset this apple cart, or create the conditions that a leader can step forward to say, I'm going to be on your side, build on that momentum, maybe get elected to office so that the political dynamics change, so that we stand a longer term effort to do that. There's, an open governor's race, a lot's hanging on that, and not to speak specifically to Michigan, but I don't think it's unique to a lot of other areas around the country. I think is an example where this can come to play. I think it's really important to realize the proactive strategy serves a long-term a long-term win in a long-term strategy in itself, but it being very helping draw the connections to the work that they do today to create the conditions for tomorrow for volunteers and others to be fighting for what we stand for, so that we don't ever enter an election cycle in which those questions, those issues are not front and center. We don't want to enter an election cycle like that ever in the future. And this is the moment. This is the moment to kind of bring attention to those issues to the broader public and these political leaders, and frankly shape the way that candidates who haven't even maybe declared yet are going to shape their policy agenda, because they're going to want to galvanize and bring on the support of those that are leading these fights.
And I think that fits real well into the next few slides, which I'm going to go through quickly because we're running out of time. Work closely with your sponsors. That's Maryland Senator Rich Madaleno, who's a terrific sponsor. Progressive groups tend to keep our legislative champions at arm's length way too much. The example that Dave just talked about is the advocates and the sponsors working together for months to create a series of a package of bills and a package of press opportunities and ways to activate the base, working together. And by coordinating together, it's like exponentially more powerful than one side or the other doing it by themselves. Earned media coverage, which is, you know, essential for our side, because the other side has the money, right? So all we've got is we've got earned media and we've got people. And so you have to maximize the power of the non-money things that we can generate. Now, this is an example of something very, great idea that's now spread around the country, where women dress up in the Handmaid's Tale outfits in order to demonstrate the problems of right-wing abortion policy. And the person right in the middle with the dollar signs, Amy, is on our staff, and this is taking place in the rotunda of the Texas Capitol. Earned media is when you convince a media source, a reporter, an editor, whatever, that what you're doing is new or newsworthy, and that they ought to cover the story because it's either it's important or it's more political. They owe it to you because they've been covering the other side. And I won't go over that too much because it's laid out in great detail in this book, but there are so many opportunities to get press when you are doing a legislative campaign, either on the offense or defense. You really got to do it over and over and over again. You've got a press, it's their job to cover you. You just not got to create things like this where they'll want to cover you, where they know that their listeners or their viewers or their readers are going to want to see it. You got to be bold in order to get that attention. And then there's paid media. Again, this takes money, but if you've got some money, there's any number of ways to use any number of ways of paid media, from online to newspapers. This was actually a newspaper ad, a quarter-page ad, to radio and TV. This newspaper ad was in local papers where there were persuadable, targeted lawmakers, and it was pretty wildly successful. The idea is not to waste your money to the extent possible, hitting a population that is not persuadable, like paid media that goes across an entire city, and try to get to something that goes right to the constituents that you're aiming for. Generate successful calls and letters. The book that we gave you explains, what you want in a call, what you want in an email, what you want in a letter, and this is just an example of the elements of a good email. Have a successful meeting. The book explains, how to set up that meeting and how to conduct it, what to carry with you, what you want to explain, what you want to be prepared to say. Basically, whenever you're meeting with any kind of policymaker or an editorial board, you've got to have at least two different narratives ready to deliver. One is essentially your elevator speech, because you may not get the time with the person that you expected. You may find that you only have a minute or two, and you need to deliver your message in 30 seconds and try to spark an answer. And you need to have a longer version carrying charts and evidence that what you're asking for is the right thing. And when you're trying to persuade someone, you need to listen to them carefully. What you're mostly trying to do is you don't really expect to persuade somebody while you're right there talking to them. Usually that's not going to happen. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to get from them what it will take to get their vote. Not, okay, you're on my side, but you know, the lawmaker says, I agree with you, but I'm just not sure that my district agrees with you, or I'm worried about the retail businesses in my district, or whatever. But if you listen, that person you're trying to persuade will tell you what it would take to get them, and then you go after that, and you persuade them. Have a successful hearing. Again, this book tells you what to do, what to carry with you, what to say, what to bring, how to dress. It's you know, can be nerve-wracking to do a hearing. On the other hand, it's an awful lot of fun to do one well. An amendment strategy, when you are in a jurisdiction that you're not going to win, you can get another hit, a press hit, and you can have a better chance of getting people on the record if you prepare your friendly policymakers to offer an amendment at just the right moment that forces the other side to vote on your policy. Okay, so they never took up your bill. Okay, so they never had a hearing on your bill. But boom, you have an amendment on the floor that strikes out the conservative bill and puts your bill before them, and they have to vote against it. That is your way of getting them on the record and having a tremendous press hit. And there are many opportunities to do that, but it's something that we don't do that often. It was done successfully in Texas this year. And after the battle is over, you just prepare for the next battle, because there's one battle after another. But one of the things you want to do is to thank your friends, as this was actually a newspaper ad that thanked lawmakers for passing a good prescription drug bill. But also, when it's practical, you want to call out the people who are against you. You want to tell your own members in their districts that the lawmaker did the wrong thing. You want to go to meetings and say the lawmaker did the wrong thing. You want to send letters to the editor, to that person's local papers, that they did the wrong thing. You want to make them think that, you know, being against this group is not a bed of roses. Maybe I ought to consider supporting them next time. And it works. And that's it. Any last questions? We only have a couple of minutes.
A couple of minutes, yeah. I mean, a couple of like points, and if people have questions, they raise your hand or type questions in. But a lot of these things that, I mean, Bernie outlined, like even if you're in a situation in which you're not going to get a hearing, you can find allies who support us, support what you're trying to do, and convene their own hearing. Now, it might not have the full weight of a legislative body convening a hearing, but you get 2 or 3 legislators together, you can convene a hearing in a member's district or in a media market to be able to garner attention to this. Town hall meetings can help generate the same type of thing. What Bernie's outlining is this inside-outside strategy. I mean, close working with a policymaker, legislator, council members, etc., and the advocates, and being very intentional about within the scope of what they can work on. The amendment strategy, I want to make sure we underscore, because it is something that we don't do often. Using the budget process, using things that have to come before the full body for discussion, having one ally, probably at least a few allies, to be able to inject the policy conversation into a budget question that they're all going to have to debate. And so they might not convene the hearing, but they can be put on record. And when they're put on record, you can build accountability campaigns to make certain that people know that they're not with them on these issues. Again, maybe weakening them so that someone else can move forward to take them on in a political environment. So all of these things. I mean, to me, this is very much a throw everything we got at the wall, see what sticks, run with what sticks, with the goal of moving the needle and defining the win and sustaining it over and over a long period of time. We know that this strategy works. It's very easy to be distracted completely in a defensive arena, but we're not going to make progress on these things unless we flip the script and go on the offense. Which I guess I'm just going to close my remarks by saying that a strong defense requires an aggressive offense. I mean, there's no question. And if this is for the long game, for those, this fight today and then fight tomorrow and the fight after that, how do we best do that? So I'm gonna stop my monologue there and close out with any last questions. I'll share this comment, and I completely forgot about this. Jennifer reminded me that we can that the governor of Maine, everyone knows, is this a very eccentric character, and who a bunch of policy advocates some proactive legislation moving through the process through the House and the Senate that he either announced he was vetoing or was expected to veto because he is just so out of touch with the most of the people of Maine, and then he forgot to do the veto, and they literally went into law because he forgot to actually veto those things. And that was the work of advocates, and I believe, if I remember correctly, there were some tax cut proposals for veterans and some birth control legislation, a series of other things. And this was a little while ago, but it is a way that even if in the environment, even if we can get the bill through the House and the Senate, we got an executive that's against us, who knows? Maybe you'll have an equally incompetent governor who will forget to veto it, and you win sooner than you thought you would. I think that, I think that's all the questions. Unless people have additional questions, type them in the question bar or, raise your hand. Be sure to download that handout that's attached to your control panel. This is, again, you've got access before anybody else on this new How to Win book that outlines all the things that Bernie's been talking about today. Put into practice, just like any of the manuals and tools that we produce. We're always looking for examples of what parts are really helpful or are working, suggestions on how to improve for future versions of this. But this is this is our moment, and I think if we look on the horizon and we look at look at some of the strategies of the conservative movement over the last 40 years. Incorporated, pushing an agenda at all levels of government over a sustained long period of time, and yes, well-funded. We need to be equally fighting back with the same intensity, the same ferocity on the things that we care for, even if today that the political environment is not such that these ideas can win, but it is part of the conversation about who's going to sit in those chairs tomorrow. And unfortunately, we are in a situation where the conservatives have made great gains, and we have a lot of ground to make up. But as Bernie started off the session, 2018, it's more than just a battle. And we're talking about, grand scale game changer that with so much at risk that we have to win. And part of winning is incorporating these strategies in these long-term fights. So with that, Bernie, I'll give you the final word, and we'll wrap up.
Thanks so much, Dave. And if you prefer a hard copy of this book, it's going to be available for sale on Amazon in about 2 weeks. And we encourage you to share it with people. You can happy to copy it and send it to your friends. It's a resource that we want to share as widely as possible.
Great. Well, thank you, Bernie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Look forward to hearing about how these successful advocacy campaigns are can benefit from this tool and all the great work that everyone's doing. So until next time, please plan on joining us every 2 weeks, where we'll be talking strategy, policy, and communication best practices to again move the needle in advancing equity and justice for people across this great country. Thank you again, and talk to you next time.